In Glassboro, New Jersey, a little community half an hour south of Philadelphia, there's a statue right by the road as you drive into town. It's of a man named Henry Rowan. He liked to be called Hank. Whenever Hank Rowan came to Glassboro, he was mobbed like a rock star, which probably embarrassed him because he wasn't given to those kinds of displays. When Hank Rowan died in December of 2015, there was a huge memorial service. Then in the evening, students from the local college gathered around his statue, holding candles, and sang for him, as earnestly as only college kids can. Rowan built Inductotherm into a multinational corporation, thousands of employees around the world, and he became a very wealthy man, although you wouldn't have known it. Almost 30 years ago, Hank Rowan became friends with a man named Phil Tuminia. Tuminia was head of development for the local college, Glassboro State, just down the road, a little university started back in the 1920s on 25 acres. Tuminia would drop by and see Rowan on his way up to Trenton. Everyone involved with Glassboro and Rowan has their own version of this story. But here's how Rowan remembered it in an interview he gave a few years before he died. It's with Don Farish, who's the former president of Glassboro State. He asked Rowan how he first got involved with the college.
Well, I think we blame it all on Phil Tuminia, because he came to see me and asked if I might make a donation to the scholarship fund of $1,500. Well, that sounded easy, $1,500, so we gave him $1,500. And you know what? He came back.
Tuminia wanted Rowan to give money to the business school, which was pretty dilapidated.
So he pushed that for a while, and finally I said, Phil, I have zero interest in your school of business. What this world needs is more engineering, how to make things. We have to produce. And Phil, what would you do with $100 million? And he nearly fell off the chair. But that's how we got to that level, and that was the beginning.
This is 1992, a generation ago. Almost nobody gave donations of $100 million back then. This was unheard of money. Rowan's gift made headlines around the country. He set a new standard.
Did you think it changed the world? Damn right it did.
At Rowan's memorial service, Phil Tuminia gets up and says, I think accurately, that Rowan is the person who triggered what has become one of the greatest explosions in educational philanthropy since the days of Andrew Carnegie and the Rockefellers. According to the Chronicle of Philanthropy, as of right now, spring of 2016, we're up to 87 gifts of $100 million or more to higher education. So everyone followed Rowan's lead, except not really. Rowan gave his money to Glassboro State College, a public university in a sleepy little town in South Jersey that no one had ever heard of. The college was close to broke. At the time, they had an endowment of $787,000. But the people who followed Hank Rowan, who were inspired by the size of his donation, almost all of them gave money to wealthy, prestigious schools. Let me just read to you the names of some of the educational institutions that have received the largest donations in American history. Ready? In 2013, the billionaire co-founder of Nike, Phil Knight, pledged $500 million to the Oregon Health and Science University in Portland. Okay, not the most prestigious institution in America. But wait. Then come three $400 million donations. The first is the billionaire John Kluge's gift to Columbia University in 2007. The second is the hedge fund manager John Paulson's gift to Harvard University in 2015. The third is Phil Knight's gift to Stanford University in 2016. And after that, in order, here are the universities that get the biggest donations. Johns Hopkins, Harvard again, University of Chicago, Princeton, Tufts, Carnegie Mellon, Cornell, Yale, Penn, Claremont McKenna, Columbia again, Baylor, USC, Columbia a third time, Michigan, University of California, Wisconsin. I could go on if you want, through all 87, but basically we're talking about the same wealthy elite schools getting the biggest donations again and again. Hank Rowan did something unprecedented, and nobody followed him. Let me run an idea by you, which I think helps to frame this question. It has to do with soccer. Actually, the difference between soccer and basketball. This idea comes from two economists named David Sally and Chris Anderson, who wrote a really great book a couple of years ago about soccer called The Numbers Game. One of the questions they asked was, what matters more if you want to build a great soccer team? How good your best player is, or how good your worst player is? And their answer was, in soccer, what matters is how good your worst player is.
Soccer is a game where if you get a single goal, if you just happen to be lucky, that goal may hold up.
That's David Sally.
And so mistakes turn out to be a very important part of soccer as a team sport. That leads you to think about, well, mistakes more often happen or more often produced by weaker players on the pitch.
Sally's argument goes like this. A soccer team has 11 players on the field at any one time. Suppose one is a superstar, and your worst player is maybe only 45% as good as the superstar. Because soccer is a sport where everyone on the field depends on everyone else, that 45% player can make one mistake and completely negate the skill of the best player.
You can have 8 beautiful passes in a row, but if your worst player, your 45% player, botches the 9th, then all the previous 8 beautiful passes are all wasted.
That's right. And because of the nature of soccer, those 8 beautiful passes may have only increased your likelihood of victory by a small percent, but then it goes right back to zero because somebody turns the ball over.
Sally and Anderson did a statistical analysis. They looked at the top soccer clubs in Europe and showed that if those teams upgraded their poorest players instead of their best players, they would score more goals and win more games. A lot more. Soccer is a weak link game.
Yes, having a better superstar was, of course, better, but actually having a better end of the bench or 11th guy on the pitch was actually more influential to whether you won matches or not.
Which would be the exact opposite of basketball.
Yeah. Basketball is probably the opposite end of the continuum from, if you think about soccer as maybe the weakest link sport, basketball is probably the most superstar-driven team sport that we have.
Even the greatest basketball teams often have one, and sometimes even 2 players who are barely better than mediocre. What matters in basketball is not how good your 5th player is, it's how good your superstar is. It's a strong link game. Think about Lionel Messi, maybe the greatest soccer player of his generation, versus Michael Jordan, the greatest basketball player of his generation.
What Jordan could do on a basketball court was Jordan could guarantee or virtually guarantee that he could get the ball. You couldn't really stop him, right? He could go to the backcourt, pick up the ball. He could dribble it forward. He could break double teams. You could try to send 3 guys at him, but then you're really opening yourself up. He could go and get a shot. Leo Messi is so good that sometimes, some rare times, where in fact he can dribble the length of the pitch. But the fact is that he in most instances, he really can't. He needs those 8 beautiful passes to set him up. And then he could do something amazingly transcendent with it.
So what's Hank Rowan? Hank Rowan is a weak link guy. He wants to make a difference, to make his country a better place. And he thinks the best way to do that is to improve the 45% player, not the superstar. He thinks America is soccer, not basketball.
You're a graduate of MIT.
Right.
Here he is again in the interview with Don Farish of Glassboro State.
Now, I would assume that MIT at that time would have been interested in receiving a gift of that size from you. Did you think about giving it to that university? Or?
No.
Okay.
My little $100 million wouldn't have made hardly any difference at all.
Hardly any difference at all. That's David Sally's point about soccer. Upgrading the superstar doesn't help as much as upgrading the worst player. Here's Hank Rowan's daughter Ginny again.
Basically, he said MIT had the greatest engineering school, bar none. He said it was the best education he could ever imagine. And he said, I'm sure they would do good things with my money. They'd build a building or do something positive. But he said it wouldn't make the difference that it's going to make down here. He said, I enjoy making a difference in this world.
Now, I'm convinced by Hank Rowan. I think American society really is soccer. We're so interdependent and we need so many perfect passes to score a goal that our challenges are weak link, not strong link. What matters is how good our 11th player is, not our first. We're in a second industrial revolution, and the lesson of this one isn't any different from the lesson of the last one. But it's really hard to get people to accept weak link arguments. David Sally, the economist who studied soccer, says he'll go to some billionaire oligarch who owns an English Premier League team and say, don't spend your £80 million on one superstar player. Spend it on 4 pretty good players at £20 million each. But the oligarch doesn't want to hear that.
If the oligarch is only worried about winning soccer matches, I can sell that. That's believable. Oligarchs buy teams for many other reasons, including wanting to hang out with really good-looking soccer strikers and wanting to sell a lot of shirts. A weak link strategy is not going to be the most glamorous thing.
And that's the problem. Superstars are glamorous. Nobel Prize winners are glamorous. Regional universities in rural South Jersey and solid, capable midfielders are not.
What people remember are the unbelievably beautiful goals.
It's a brilliant run from Messi. Did he go all the way? It's one of the great Copa del Rey final goals.
They may not realize that the 7 maybe less glamorous passes that set up that 8th beautiful through ball were maybe arguably just as important, but they were much more mundane and they just involved simple movement to open spaces, and people don't adequately value that.
When we asked ourselves the question, what could Stanford do to make a better contribution to the world? We quickly converged on building a scholarship program that would bring the most talented students and prepare them to be leaders in the world, to lead on attacking the important problems.
John Hennessy, president of Stanford University since 2000, widely considered one of the greatest presidents in Stanford history.
As I began to think about the end of my term as president, I started to think, was there something else perhaps we could do where we could build on everything we've put in place at Stanford and offer something that would be a great thing for the world?
Not long before we talked, I took a walk across the Stanford campus, and it's like entering a shrine to higher education. Everything is gleaming. Gorgeous, groomed, green. That's all Hennessy's work. He's transformed the school, doubled the endowment from $11 to $22 billion, made it into maybe the greatest university in the world. When we talked, he was just about to retire and thinking about his legacy.
Many people, myself included, became increasingly concerned about what we saw as a void in great leadership around the world, in the public sector as well as in the private sector.
Hennessy decided he wanted to start a graduate program, kind of like the Rhodes Scholarship. Every year, it would bring 100 of the brightest, most accomplished college grads from around the world to Stanford and let them apply their minds to the problems of the world. He goes to his deans, then his trustees. Everyone loves the idea.
And then over the last summer, I went to Phil Knight and explained the idea to him, and he was enthusiastic about it and came back a month later and said he'd help us make it happen.
Remember, Phil Knight is the co-founder of Nike, a billionaire many times over, and a serious philanthropist. How did you pick Phil Knight as someone to approach? Was he the first person you approached?
I knew Phil had been concerned about leadership globally. He and I had had a good working relationship.
So he ends up giving $400 million. How does one arrive at that number? Is that a number you suggested to him, or?
It's roughly half. I mean, our goal is somewhere in the 750 to 800 to implement the entire program, secure it permanently. And so I think in the past, finding a naming gift of that scale is probably necessary, and then you can find gifts to fill in the rest of it.
It was my criticism of the Phil Knight donation that led Hennessy to get in touch with me. He wanted to explain his thinking, which is John Hennessy wants to do a great thing for the world. So he sets up an $800 million graduate program for 100 elite students. He's the anti-Rowan, right? Hank Rowan wanted to start at the bottom and tries to lift as many people up as possible. Hennessy starts at the top and lavishes $800 million on the most exclusive group he can find. Rowan is a weak link guy. His world is soccer. Hennessy is playing basketball, and he wants to focus his billions on the superstars. With all due respect, the president of Stanford needs to get out more. Take a little trip to Glassboro, New Jersey, to the campus of what's now called Rowan University. Maybe take a look at the statue up front.
How can we not talk about family when family's all that we got? Everything I would do, you be standing there by my side. And now you gon' be with me for the last time. Got the light hold every memory as you go. And every road you take will always lead you home. It's been a long day without you, my friend, and I'll tell you all about it when I see you again. We come a long way from where we began. Oh, I'll tell you all about it when I see you again. When I see you again. When I see you again.